God willing, today we will be conducting our Quran study from Surah 18, verse 86. Uh, let's all seek refuge in God, away from Satan the rejected. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. When he reached the far west, he found the sun setting in the vast ocean, and found people there. We said, Zulkarnain, you can rule as you wish, either punish or be kind to them. He said, as for those who transgress, I will. Sorry, just one moment. I'm noticing some words are being cut off. God willing, that's better. Okay.
So do command and click on minus. Command plus minus.
On the OBS or okay.
On the window where you're reading the Quran.
Okay. Command plus
minus.
Oh. Is that better?
No. It didn't change anything. Yeah. Well. Okay, maybe try to make the window a little bit wider.
Okay.
Of the Quran. I don't know. Yeah, that's good. That's good. That was good before.
Okay. The problem is, I won't be able to see anything else. So this is good, you're saying?
Okay. That's good. Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
That's good.
So God willing, I'll continue, but I won't be able to see anything on the OBS. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. He said, as for those who transgress, we will punish them. Then, when they return to their Lord, he will commit them to more retribution. So, just to clarify, the context of this is Zulkarnain, and talking like there's speculation as to who it could be. One I forgot who was. Somebody during last Quran study mentioned that it could be Buddha. Who knows? But ultimately, it's talking about going to the east and the west and the Zulkarnain character, right? So God willing, I'll continue. Verse 88. As for those who believe, oh, sorry, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I was gonna say Dr. Khalifa had mentioned in the glossary in the Quran that it's probably referring to Buddha.
Oh, okay. So there you go. At least that gives some clarification. Thank you, brother. So, verse 88. As for those who believe and lead a righteous life, they receive a good reward. We will treat them kindly. Then he pursued another way. When he reached the Far East, he found the sun rising on people who had no shelter and nothing to shelter them from it. Naturally, we are fully aware of everything he found out. So it's giving two perspectives here, right? It's giving Zulkarnain the fact that he's a well-traveled individual. He's going to the east, right? And there's no shelter for them. So it's, you know, I would assume being out in the sun all the time, it's not a good thing. And even the Quran states that, you know, paradise would be a place that's well sheltered or well shaded, right? So this would be the opposite of that effect, right? These people here on this earth, no shelter from the sun, and Zulkarnain sees them. Then it also shows that God is obviously fully aware of what was happening, but it was new to Zulkarnain, right? So just showing that perspective difference. God willing, I'll continue. He then pursued another way. When he reached the valley between the two palisades, he found people whose language was barely understandable. They said, O Zulkarnain, Gog and Magog are corruptors of the earth. Can we pay you to create a barrier between us and them? So there is a footnote here for 1894 to 98. One of my duties as God's messenger of the covenant, and this is referring to Dr. Rashad Khalifa, who wrote this footnote, of course, is to state that Gog and Magog, the final sign before the end of the world, will reappear in 2270 AD, or 1700 AH. This is based off the lunar calendar, just 10 years before the end. Note that Gog and Magog occur in the surahs 18 and 21, precisely 17 years before the end of each surah, representing 17 lunar centuries. So Surah 72:27, and then we can also reference Appendix 25. So this is through these verses, and through actually where we actually read in the cave a couple of studies earlier, Dr. Rashad Khalifa with the mathematical code was able to determine when the end of days is, when the last day is, and when when this all comes to an end, this test of life, right? And that is based off of the Roman Greco calendar, 2270 AD, or based off of the lunar calendar, 1700 AH. So what a blessing! We another miracle to validate the message that Dr. Rashad Khalifa came with, and along with the miraculousness of the Quran, right? So Gog and Magog, as we know, is the only community that is to be recreated. God tells us in the Quran that there is no community that lives after it has been destroyed, excluding Gog and Magog. So that is kind of the point in which, when that community comes back, we will recognize that, we don't have much time left. It's 10 years now. God willing, I don't think anybody listening to this now or in this study will be alive during that time, but it's good to know that in the vast time frame of life that God has created for this earth, we are very, very much at the end of it, right? So, God willing, I'll continue. 1895. He said, "My Lord has given me great bounties. If you cooperate with me, I will build a dam between you and them. Bring to me masses of iron." Once he filled the gap between the two palisades, he said, "Blow." Once it was red hot, he said, "Help me pour tar on top of it." Thus they could not climb it, nor could they bore holes in it. Now, this is sheerly amazing, just on a point of building a wall between the two palisades. So, these people who are trying to escape from this dreaded community of Gog and Magog, right? And Zulkarnain is asked to build a wall between the two palisades, between the two communities. And we also know that iron is the most useful element that God has created for our benefit, right? And Zulkarnain uses two great benefits of what God has given us here on this earth. Not only the iron, but tar, which is, for lack of better words, fossil fuels, right? Oil, but like heavily saturated, viscous oil, right? And if you were trying to, like, iron is one thing. It's not easy to drill through iron by any means necessary. Ask any machinist, right? It takes a lot of time and effort and a lot of patience. But then on top of it, to put tar, this is quite the impenetrable wall. There's not much going around it. So this is a serious wall to stop the two communities from interacting. So obviously there's quite the animosity between these two communities, right? And then Zulkarnain, after creating this wall by God's leave, he said, "This is the mercy from my Lord. When the prophecy of my Lord comes to pass, he will cause the dam to crumble. The prophecy of my Lord is the truth. At that time, we will let them invade one another. Then the horn will be blown, and we will summon them all together. We will present hell on that day to the disbelievers. They are the ones whose eyes were too veiled to see my message, nor could they hear. it's very interesting to hear this wall, this impenetrable wall that nobody could climb or bore through. And then we have this stark difference between the disbelievers, hell, and how their eyes were veiled, right? Much like that impenetrable wall, arrogance tends to be that blindness, right? Um, it is amazing when you go through life and you talk to many people who consider themselves believers or spiritual or whatever the world may have a term for. Um, they'll believe in sticks and stones and the oddest of things, but when you bring complete logic as God has created here in this Quran, which is sheerly miraculous, right? There's no nonsense in it. It's purely factual, purely. It's based off of a mathematical code that is, you know, irrefutable, right? Like if you examine the truth in all of it, it's well, it's just shocking, right? It's as real as anything else you can see in this world, right? It's like looking at a tree and saying that tree doesn't exist. It's just odd, right? And God gives us this example of their eyes being veiled, right? Being completely blind. Um, it is unfortunate, but as we know, there is a destined amount of people who are just going to be stuck in their blindness and in their deafness, right? Uh, so unfortunately, it's due to their arrogance and due to their blindness that they will suffer hell, right? As stated, right? In Ayah 1, we will present hell on that day to the disbelievers, right? So I'll continue on 102. Do those who disbelieve think that they can get away with setting up my servants as gods beside me? We have prepared for the disbelievers hell as an eternal abode. Say, shall I tell you who the worst losers are? They are the ones whose works in this life are totally astray, but they think they are doing good. Such are the ones who disbelieved in the revelations of their Lord and in meeting him. Therefore, their works are in vain. On the day of resurrection, they have no weight. So to go back to those people who believe in sticks and stones, and obviously God is also showing that people will set God's servants as gods beside him. Well, and if Zulkarnain was Buddha, there's a whole religion based off of that. Christians believing Jesus to be a God incarnate with a lowercase g, right? And we constantly see this myth of intercession, even in Sunni Islam, right? People say that Muhammad will pray for them on the day of judgment or something like that. It's funny how these people think they're doing correctly, think they're doing right, yet they're just off the right path. And God kind of gives that test too, right? He tells us in the Quran, he states that they'll say they're believers, but if you say God alone, they get upset until you mention another name beside it. Well, obviously, I'm not saying it verbatim, but there is a verse that has that context, and you see this constantly, right? Whether it be the Shahada, Sunni, Shia, Sufi, whatever, like their Shahada has a whole part designated to the Prophet, right? Which doesn't make sense. We are told constantly in the Quran that this is the religion substantiated by Abraham, right? Abraham had no idea who Muhammad was, so why is that part of the Shahada? Right? It doesn't make sense. And people will blind themselves with beliefs in this intercessor, into this messenger, who was created, who has no power to benefit them or harm them, who doesn't even know that that all these people who are essentially quote unquote following them, they have no idea about that at all. And when God even tells us this on the day of resurrection, there'll be witnesses against these people, right? And the worst part about it, I think, just looking back, is the fact that these people think they're doing good, and that is truly the harm, right? In some aspects they are trying. They are trying for the hereafter, right? Um, but what a loss! What a loss, because they attribute it to somebody else other than God, when God created all things. Like, even these people, if you were to sit them down and say, who created the universe? God, right? But then why are you praying to Muhammad, or why are you praying to Jesus, or why are you praying to this saint or this prophet or whatever, right? There's no logic in it, and it's really unfortunate. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to guard ourselves from these people. So, God willing, I'll continue, and this is continuing on to these disbelievers that we're referencing. Their just requital is hell, in return for their disbelief and for mocking my revelations and my messengers. As for those who believe and lead a righteous life, they have deserved a blissful paradise as their abode. Forever they abide therein. They will never want any other substitute. So we have this contrast, and we constantly see this in the Quran, right? That shows the outcome of two paths, right? The one path being following truth and submitting, or the path of falsehood and compromise, right? Those are the two paths that God has laid out for everybody to choose upon, right? And invariably, unfortunately, the majority of humanity that has ever existed and ever will exist will choose the path of compromise, choose the path of falsehood, right? To make themselves feel better here on this earth. But for the few who submit and uphold truth above all else, well, God above all else, and with the truth, right? Those are the people who deserve paradise and a just reward, right? God has created this entire universe to play out this test for us. He knows who will pass and who will fail. But what a mercy and what a gift to give to us. And those who pass this test, on top of that gift, God once again shows His grace and mercy by, redeeming them. What a blessing, right? 109. Say, if the ocean were ink for the words of my Lord, the ocean would run out before the words of my Lord run out, even if we double the ink supply. Say, I am no more than a human like you, being inspired that your God is one God. Those who hope to meet their Lord shall work righteousness and never worship any other gods beside his Lord. Uh, if you ask the Christians, what's the first commandment, which is the laws, the statutes that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. Number one, don't have any other gods before me. It's funny, not in a ha-ha way, but it's a funny thing that this is the number one rule, right? In Islam, it's La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. This is the number one rule. If you got to follow one thing, this is it, right? Just follow God alone. And the Christians, many people who practice some type of intercession or polytheism, ranking people beside God, they know that to be true. Yet they fall back on their their thoughts of intercession or whatever. And it's very odd. And God tells us that even though the Quran is very short in consideration of how much is being explained, right? The Quran is very small when it comes down to how dense each verse is, right? That's why we have a Quran study. And even though we study it time and time again, we look at new verses from new perspectives with the contrast of the truth. And as time goes on, technology changes, and we notice how there is more truth in the matter than what has been previously suspected, right? And yet, as small as the Quran is, God's word is everlasting. It's infinite. It will never run out. As God gives us allegory, right? The ocean were the ink for God's words, right? It would run out before the Lord, words of the Lord run out. So, and I think this is a two-way part. God's wisdom, obviously, and His omniscience and His omnipotence, but also um, for us to glorify Him, right? Uh, God's grace has encompassed the universes, right? For us to glorify Him, uh, you know, there's definitely a short supply. God willing, will be better and glorify Him and magnify Him more, right? So, God willing, I'll continue on 111. Oh, sorry, Surah 19, Miriam. So, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. KHYAS. So there is a footnote here, and it's saying how this is the most amount of initials of any surah, right? Very special, and uh, I think it's no coincidence that it's also the 19th surah. So God willing, I'll read this footnote here. This is the maximum number of Quranic initials. Because this surah deals with such crucial matters as the miraculous birth of John and the virgin birth of Jesus, and strongly condemns the gross blasphemy that considers Jesus to be the Son of God. The 5 initials provide a powerful physical evidence to support these issues. See Appendices 1 and 22. So, yeah, first things first, when it comes down to the mathematical code that makes this an airtight script and revelation, these initials, if I'm not mistaken, if you were to read it in Arabic, which unfortunately I don't, but I do know that if you were to count these initials in this surah, they will turn out to be multiples of 19, if I'm not correct, which is amazing, right? Like that is sheerly shocking. And not only that, like we've went over many other studies where we see mathematical codes and it's very easy to calculate. So pretty wild to say the least. Just a miracle that we can see in front of us day to day. And sometimes you show it to some people, and they think of it as oh yeah, that's cool, right? Like no, it's greater than cool. It's a miracle. There is no way to have this comprehensive of a book and yet have it mathematically structured. It's impossible. Well, not for God, but for anybody else. So we'll continue. A narration about your Lord's mercy towards his servant Zechariah. He called his Lord, a secret call. He said, My Lord, the bones have turned brittle in my body, and my hair is aflame with gray. As I implore you, my Lord, I never despair. I worry about my dependents after me, and my wife has been sterile. Grant me from you an heir. Let him be my heir and the heir of Jacob's clan, and make him, my Lord, acceptable. So clearly Zechariah is a very humble servant, right? He's becoming an old man, as he mentions, his bones are turning brittle and his hair is gray, right? But he says, as I implore you, my Lord, I never despair. A true good servant, right? Regardless of the outcome, some of us have been blessed to be fathers, and some not, right? But when time catches up with you and you're ending up to die, you know, having children can be a blessing and a great blessing, and maybe not for some, but for those who are blessed with it, they recognize there's great growth and great humility and great purpose in it. And Zechariah, he's at the edge of his life, essentially here, and he's worried about all the people that depend on him, and he wants somebody who can kind of take over the family, the clan, right? And he implores God, and he says, "I will never despair, imploring you." That shows great hope, showing that whatever may come, it's in God's hands, but he has hope. He doesn't despair. He implores him with great humility, right? And that's a beautiful thing to have and something we should strive for as submitters, right? God, God through a messenger calls out to Zechariah in verse 7. It says, "O Zechariah, we give you good news. A boy whose name shall be John, Yahya. We never created anyone like him before." He said, "My Lord, will I have a son despite my wife's sterility and despite my old age?" He said, "Thus said your Lord, it is easy for me to do. I created you before that, and you were nothing." He said, "My Lord, give me a sign." He said, "Your sign is that you will not speak to the people for 3 consecutive nights." He came out to his family from the sanctuary and signaled to them, "Meditate on God day and night." So what a blessing once again. Even though Zechariah was worried about having an heir, right? God says, "Yeah, well, I'm going to give you an heir, and I'm going to get you a son who was like nobody else, right? He's going to be a good servant of me." And like, what a blessing as a father who's a submitter, right? God tells you, "I'm going to give you a son who's a great submitter, a great servant." Fantastic, right? Like that's a bonus on top of a bonus. And clearly it was dire straits because even Zechariah, after praying to God and hearing from God's messenger that God's going to give you a son, he's like, "Are you sure? Like my wife's sterile, right? I'm really old." So it was clearly dire straits for him. Like even though he gave this prayer, he kind of thought of it as impossible, right? And even though God is telling him he's going to have a son, he's like, "Well, really?" He's kind of double guessing it. Um, and then God says, "Yeah, of course, it's easy for me to do. I created you, and you were nothing, right? So what does your age have to do with any of this in the matter, right?" So, and then Zechariah turns around and says to his family, like, now he's silent for 3 consecutive nights, and he tells everybody, meditate on God, glorify God for the night, because this is surely a miracle, right? I could only imagine he'd be ecstatic as to hear such a guarantee from God that he's having a new son, right? So, God willing, we'll continue. Verse 12 of Surah 19. "O John, you shall uphold the scripture strongly. We endowed him with wisdom, even in his youth, and we endowed him with kindness from us and purity, for he was righteous. He honored his parents and was never a disobedient tyrant. Peace be upon him the day he was born, the day he dies, and the day he is resurrected back to life." Mentioned in the scripture, Mary, she isolated herself from her family into an eastern location. While a barrier separated her from them, he sent to her our spirit. We sent to her our spirit. He went to her in the form of a human being. She said, "I seek refuge in the most gracious, that you may be righteous." He said, "I am the messenger of your Lord to grant you a pure son." She said, "How can I have a son when no man has touched me? I've never been unchaste." He said, "Thus said your Lord, it is easy for me. We will render him a sign for the people and a mercy from us. This is a predestined manner." So there is this continuation. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm God willing, I'm correct. I recall a story where Zachariah, who was placed as a guardian for Mary, went into her quarters and saw all these provisions, right, as it's described by God. And where did you get these provisions, Mary? Well, God gives to whoever whoever he pleases, right? That was kind of Mary's explanation for it, right? Like, God has blessed me. And Zechariah hearing this, because, Mary could have turned arrogant and been like, "Well, I'm just savvy, right?" Or whatever the excuses we hear today as to why things come out as an outcome, right? But Mary was very humble and says, God provided these things, and He provides without limits to whomever He wants, right? Putting God first. And Zachariah at that time was like, God grant me such a good servant, such a good child, right? Um, and then of course comes John, and then we have this back to back where God explains John, and then brings it back to Mary, right? Um, you know, Mary is blessed as a child and growing up. She's unchaste and very pure, a very good woman, right? A good submitter, a servant, right? And somebody comes out of the blue, and she's scared, right? Because, well, being a woman alone, segregated or isolated herself from her family in an eastern location, right? Seeing a guy just come up to you randomly, I would imagine would be very, very scary, right? And Mary says, I seek refuge in the most gracious, that you may be righteous, right? And it turns out, this is a messenger from God, right? And, giving her good news of a pure son, right? And it gives this contrast of John, as the footnote says, of a miraculous child who was born out of an old man and a sterile old woman, right? Very easy for God to have to make place. And then you have the contrast of um, a son being born to a woman who has no father, right? As crazy as it sounded to John, for John, when Zechariah got the blessing from the messenger saying, yeah, you're going to have a son, despite your old age and sterility, like that was crazy to Zechariah. And God gives the explanation, well, I made you from nothing, right? So it's easy for me to do. And it shows how easy God's creation is to God, as we have that contrast with Mary here, and the birth of Jesus, right? It's easy. It's easy for me. So, regardless of how man is created, or whatever God places out to be, there should be no question. There should be no question as to why it can be done. God created everything. It's no more like even God says, the universe was much more difficult than our creation, right? And when you look into the stars, it's amazing. It's endless, right? From the scope of humanity, right? The universe is, incalculably large, right? It's massive, and yet people are like, oh well, how come Jesus didn't have a father? Well, it's easy for God to do, right? Adam had no father or a mother, and yet that was easy for God to do. So it should take away all doubt as to, the excuses that people give to pray for intercession or whatsoever, right? Jesus was a servant of God and nothing more. Though he was a good example and a good servant of God, one of the best examples. Certainly, he was no more than a man who was worried about his own salvation, right? He was worried about being redeemed at the end of days. So we all have. He was no more than a man. Just to keep it short. God willing, I'll continue. He said, "Thus said your Lord, it is easy for me. We will render him a sign for the people and a mercy from us. This is a predestined manner." When she bore him, she isolated herself to a faraway place. The birth process came to her by the trunk of a palm tree. She said, I am so ashamed. I wish I were dead before this happened and completely forgotten. The infant called her from beneath her, saying, Do not grieve. Your Lord has provided you with a stream. Quick note, it must have been a very difficult time for Mary, right? This is back in the day where single mothers weren't exactly looked upon as independent women by society. It was a gross offense to have a child out of wedlock, and not only that, like you didn't have much of a support, right? Like nowadays, you can just go to a grocery store. You got your food, right? You can do whatever. But this is back in the day when there were marauders on the street. Well, it goes to show, even Mary was scared of a guy approaching her, right? Out of the blue in an eastern location, right? It was a scary time for a woman, or anybody in that matter, but especially a woman who is bearing a child with no father. And you can see why this brings shame. Like, Mary kind of feels shameful at the point, right? Being a human that she is, right? And her infant calls from beneath her during the birthing process, right? Which must have gave her some, some confidence in the matter, right? Alleviated her worries. Uh, the infant called her from beneath her, saying, "Do not grieve. Your Lord has provided you with a stream. If you shake this trunk of this palm tree, it will drop ripe dates for you." So God is, explaining through Jesus, the son that's being born at the point to Mary. God is providing you all the provisions. You have water to drink. You have food to eat. Don't worry. And like, I could imagine it would be worrisome being a mother who's bearing a child, and how am I going to take care of this child? How am I going to feed it? How am I going to clothe it? And it would give you great shame, right? Just as a human being, and God kind of alleviates her by saying, "Hey, you always have water and you always have food." God also gives us this promise with children, right? That He will provide for the children, right? So, in God's grace and mercy, He alleviates Mary's concerns, right? And there's a footnote here. Thus, Jesus was born in late September or early October. This is when dates ripen in the Middle East to the point of falling off the tree. This is actually even known about Christians, that Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, but yet they still celebrate it for some reason. So kind of funny that we even have proof in the matter. 26. Eat and drink and be happy. When you see anyone, say, "I have made a vow of silence. I'm not talking today to anybody." So God saw the humiliation, the shamefulness of Mary, and gave her a great consult. Just somebody to lean on. Well, not lean on, but like to give her confidence in the matter, right? Don't worry about eating. Don't worry about drinking, and don't worry about being ashamed of being a mother with no child. Like with a child, right? Like with no father, which would be, well, not easy back in the day, right? The people would have been judging you pretty hard, pretty quickly, right? So God's like, eat and drink, be happy with what you have, and if anybody wants to talk to you, what's going on, just say you have a vow of silence. You don't have to explain to anybody, right? And this kind of alleviates Mary's problems. Obviously, she had to have a lot of faith in it, but what a blessing God gives to Mary here as well, right? And she came to her family carrying him. They said, "Oh, Mary, you committed something that is totally unexpected. O descendant of Aaron, your father was not a bad man, nor was he your mother unchaste." So once again, kind of validating her fears, right? She's being judged pretty quickly. And then, Mary turns around in 29, and she pointed to him, being the infant, being Jesus. They said, "How can we talk with an infant in the crib?" The infant spoke and said, "I'm a servant of God. He has given me the scripture and has appointed me as a prophet. He made me blessed wherever I go, and enjoined me to observe the contact prayers and the obligatory charity for as long as I live." So it almost goes full circle here. You see, John was Zechariah, who was a great blessing, blessing for Zechariah, right? Something that he deemed impossible. And yet somebody very closely tied to Zechariah is Mary, who has this miraculous child of Jesus. And even though things weren't going to turn out the way they thought they had, right? Zechariah, uh, you know, even when told directly, yeah, you're going to have a son, he wasn't sure, right? Like it didn't make sense to him. But he implored and he was blessed by God, right? And then you have this with Mary, who during the birthing process, starting to become ashamed and, you know, I wouldn't say doubts, but like there's clearly an overwhelming emotional experience that Mary must be having at this point, right? And despite all her comprehension, despite all whatever she can think is possible, God blesses her immediately to relieve her, right? To alleviate her concerns. Gives her food, gives her drink, and says, "Don't talk. I'm going to talk through. Like I'm going to allow my servant to talk for you, right? And that being Jesus. And like what a better way, right? I'm sure all those judgments that her family had as soon as the baby started talking, like everybody's like, okay, well, this is a unique situation, to say the least, right? God God creates scenarios, even if it's deemed impossible for us, it's easy for God, right? And to continue having hope and having faith in those scenarios where it doesn't make sense, where it doesn't like maybe things are a little bit more difficult than they have to be or whatever. But if you strive and you hold fast and be steadfast as a servant and submitter, God can make the impossible possible, right? And that's a very clear standpoint here, right? Uh, so, and he even substantiates the fact that he's a observer of the contact prayers and the obligatory charity, the salat and the zakat, right? Uh, he ends up by saying, "And peace be upon me, the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I was resurrected." That was Jesus, the Son of Mary, and this is the truth of this matter, about which they continue to doubt. It does not befit God that he begets a son, be he glorified, to have anything done. He simply says to it, be, and it is. He also proclaimed, God is my Lord and your Lord. You shall worship him alone. This is the right path. So, God willing, I think that will be the end of it for today out of the verses. That being said, I'm just going to close off by saying, today's verses, though I did not entirely prepare for them, it is beautiful that we have this example of Zechariah with John, Mary with Jesus, that nothing is too difficult for God, right? Uh, Having faith in Him is all that you need, right? It is the guarantee, as summarized in verse 36, right? God is my Lord and your Lord. You shall worship Him alone. This is the right path. Yeah, what a beautiful way to end it off. You know, God willing, that'll end it. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know.
Yeah, sorry, brother. So, mashallah, good study. Did you read up until nine? I mean, you read up until 1936.
That's correct, brother.
Yeah, I think we read 2 pages, right? So, you're supposed to end at 1921.
Oh, sorry, brother. My pages on my screen are larger. So
no worries. Okay, so God willing, next Quran study will start again from 22. God willing, that's okay.
Sorry, brother.
Thank you. No problem. Yeah, so I'm just thinking, like, I mean, imagine being present in that time where the child is speaking from the crib, and then seeing people who actually, try to crucify him, knowing that, this was not an ordinary thing that they were witnessing. I mean, having a child from the crib. I mean, how would you explain that? I mean, they probably thought. I mean, I don't know, but you'd have to be really evil, in order to see all this and be a complete disbeliever. Like, I mean, seeing Mary is one thing, having a child, but then seeing the child, speaking from the crib would definitely, and all the miracles that God gave him, right? So it shows to us, like, I mean, a person who's a disbeliever has, a bad soul. It doesn't matter what they see. It's their beliefs are divinely controlled by God. I mean, what they see, what they hear, and what goes on in their brains, is completely, not dependent on proofs and miracles. They can see the best proofs and the most amazing miracles, and still will find a reason to disbelieve.
Yeah, mashallah. It would be a wild sight to see, man. Like an infant just born, just talking to you. It would give you a shock
Yeah,
to the system for sure, right?
yeah, like Boss Baby.
Oh yeah. Well, well, it's true, right? Like I'm a prophet. Oh my gosh, like. Hey, are you forgetting prayer? Yeah, yeah. Sorry, like it would be wild, wild, and like, but what a blessing too to Mary, right? Like, I could only imagine the shame she was feeling at the beginning, right? Because she's only human, right? And then, seeing an infant talk, I think that alleviates anybody's questions. Okay, this is a unique situation, like this isn't a normal situation, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
what a blessing.
And and being a baby too, like the baby is not saying like goo gaga and like kiddish stuff. The baby's speaking righteous things, saying I'm appointed as a prophet from God, and so they have to see that clearly. I mean, he's not even talking with the mindset of a little kid, or an infant. He's clearly there's something else going on here.
I well, it would bring so much gravity to the situation, right? Because as an adult who you're judging this woman who just had birth without a father, right? And she's vowing silence because of her shame, and you're just like, oh, okay, And then this child, this baby, that's like not even a year old yet, starts talking to you and kind of undressing you, be like, hey, you should be righteous. It would make you like stop everything. I would think, right? Like it would make you feel pretty apologetic at that point, right?
Mm-hmm. Subhanallah, yes. And we see, for us also, to see that, God has put in the mathematical miracle. I mean, I think this is the longest initial surah, if I'm not mistaken, right? The number of initials that it says in the footnote. Did we read the footnote, by the way?
For the initials,
Yeah.
I do believe so, brother. Yes.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I mean, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 initials, right? And I think this is the surah with the longest initials, because like it says, it deals with the most crucial matters. This is the maximum number of Quranic initials, and subhanallah. So this strengthens. This is for us to strengthen our faith as well. Like it's almost as if we saw all of this happening as we're reading it. Right? SubhanAllah, because it's all confirmed for us mathematically.
Yes. Well, the most amount of initials, which makes it the most complex,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, the most complex surah,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's irrefutable.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to determine which one is more complex because it's not just based on the number of initials. There's so many other, things going on with the mathematical proofs, but yeah, I mean, definitely in terms of initials and its frequencies, this definitely has the longest number, and we see in Appendix 1, I mean, how that plays in Appendix 22. But really, I think the lesson that you touched on, brother, was the fact that anything is possible for God. And so, like, for example, for Zechariah, like, he never despaired from God, and his from God's mercy. It says, "As I implored you, my Lord, I never despaired." And so his wife is sterile and he's old, his bones are brittle, and he's still praying to God and never giving up. And so that and many other verses in the Quran. I mean, all of that proves to us that this is the mindset, this is the quality of a believer. That a person who's a believer will never despair from God's grace and mercy. So, like, it reminds me of this funny movie. We saw where this one guy, he's in love with this woman, and he wants her and he wants to propose to her, and just never happens. One thing leads to another, and then eventually, you know, he finds, like, after many many years, like maybe 50 years or 40 years or so, he finds a way to go and propose her, and then uh, when she says yes, or I think like before she says yes, like she dies. But but it's like the end of his life, and they're both dying, but like he never gave up. And sort of for me, it's sort of tied into our love for God, and and not giving up, on His mercy and hope from Him. Like, no matter how bad the situation seems, you should never think that anything is impossible for God to do. And I think it also reminds me of another example that the messenger of God, Dr. Shah Khalifa, he actually gave this example too, right? In reference to the verses about Moses, when the people of Moses um, were getting caught, looked like they were getting caught by, Pharaoh's army, and they thought that they almost lost, like they thought, oh, they're going to be caught now. And he says, no way, my Lord is with me, he will guide me. And then the messenger explained how, this will be true for any submitter. You could be stuck in the most dire situation, and a helicopter will just come to your rescue and, take you, or something like that, So we should always, I mean, that's, I think definitely, as we go through the admissions test, many of us, we have to keep that in mind, that, we will be tested by, situations, tough situations. Um, Today I was just actually listening to one of the audio Quran studies of the Messenger of the Covenant, also talking about the same thing, and about the messengers and those with him, and they were tested and shaken up, until they said, where's God's victory, and God's victory is near. And then another verse that says, just when the messengers despair and think that they have been rejected, our victory comes to them. This has been the system, So this is definitely something that we have to keep in mind, that, until we are here in this world, until we have the chance, like, we cannot be someone that, falls into despair and thinks that, oh, I can give up on this possibility. We should always have hope from God, and we should continue to implore God as long as we have a chance, and as long as it's like 0.0000001%, a chance of something might happen, as long we should have that outcome. I mean, we should have that hope, that there could be that outcome from God, whether it happens or not, depends, because maybe something we might think is good for us and we may want it really badly, and it might not be for us. But as far as God is concerned, we should know that we cannot lose hope, Um, so yeah, so I wanted to share.
Yeah, it's a guarantee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what a blessing, right? Like, God's word is truth, right? Even Zechariah, after he was blessed, even though it was something he implored for, he was like, really,
Mm-hmm.
you know, yeah.
Yeah.
God gives you a guarantee, to follow Him and submit to Him, and
Mm-hmm.
he'll make it happen for you, right? Maybe not in the way you
Yeah.
want it, but you know,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately at the end of the day, it's the best path, right? And you know,
Absolutely.
who are we to argue, right? I'm looking at the comments here. I wasn't being able to read them when I was doing the study. But Brother Jaffer, you were referring to something, and Brother Suleiman, you said the messenger. I don't know what that was referring to.
Yeah, I think we were talking about Zulkarnain,
Oh,
when you said someone had said, so we said it was the messenger.
oh, the Buddha. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And he said most probably, right? So we should leave it at most probably too, because then someone could say, well, since he said most probably, but we take the probably out, that changes the meaning. He said probably for a reason too. So for most probably Buddha. Um, and there also seems like, I mean, Zulkarnain, like he had a lot of resources, and I mean, I don't know in terms of like how he was able to melt the iron, and it says, "Bring to me masses of iron." Once he filled the gap between the two palisades, he said, "Blow." Once it was red hot, he said, "Help me pour tar on top of it." So, I mean, this looks like something that requires a lot of manpower, right? And it looks like that's what they had probably at the time. But it's like one of those things that like we'll find out clearly exactly like who those people are on the day of judgment. And another one thing I wanted to mention, we were talking about none of us will be there when Gog and Magog reappear, but I wanted to that are here. But I wanted to say our jinns, which are here now, are gonna be most likely present alive, because we live for a few hundred years after we die, right? So our jinns are most likely going to be alive and see all those events unfold on Earth, which is interesting.
It's weird how they are made as a companion for us, yet they have a longer extended lifetime. I wonder why that is. Only God knows, I guess.
No, I mean, so it's explained why, right? Because we have been, we as humans, we have been given the natural instinct to worship God alone, whereas the jinns do not have that instinct. They're not given that instinct. So, in lieu of that, they are given more time, to live a few hundred years, to make up their mind, basically.
God is by far the most gracious, the most merciful. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, just imagine they get to go like explore galaxies and parts of the universe. So and they have a lot of time to do that too. So if they disbelieve after that, then they really, I guess, deserve to be in hell.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no excuse.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't say, "Oh, we didn't." It's like, no, we had a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So we're the quick study, whereas they're the long semester, I guess. They got the long term time, whereas we have a quicker test, which is, I guess, good, right? Thank God we have the instinct of praising Him alone, right?
Yeah, I mean, but it's also, I mean, it's still not easy either way, both of them. The thing is, the majority of people are still going to hell, right? So, jinns, humans, majority of them are still going to hell. Majority of them are failing their tests. So, it's not really easy to be a jinn or a human and pass your test.
Oh, I just said quicker, brother. I didn't say easier.
No, no. I mean, you were saying like it's a good thing that it's a quick one, right?
Oh, thank God. And it doesn't feel
Yeah.
that
So
quick
I mean,
anyway.
quick. Yeah, it doesn't feel quick at all. But I mean, the thing is that quick doesn't necessarily translate to easy. Like, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, God knows. But thank God that we are. But of course, our genes are with us right now. And it's hard to separate the two as we're talking about us.
Is there any way, like, I don't know if the messenger has ever touched upon this. Is there any way where, like, you can make your companion a submitter as well? Like, because I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, so
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. So I mean, yeah. So I mean, you have this opportunity, lifetime opportunity, to convince your jinn, right? If you become a submitter, right, then your jinn will most likely also become a submitter, and as you go through your um, time, it's possible that he may not, right? But the thing is, um, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just a little confused right now. But he talks about, for example, the fact that a constant argument takes place between you and your jinn, as you go through life circumstances. So, um, you know, you have to talk him out of things like when your jinn starts to whisper to you like ideas, he wants to talk you into doing something wrong, let's say, or devil's point of view, starts advocating devil's point of view, as they do most of the time, right? Unless they become submitters with you, they will do that. So you have to try to talk to them. It's an internal debate. Obviously, you don't have to speak to yourself, and people might think you have schizophrenia or something. But it's a debate that takes place in our heads, right? So we have to have that debate and that dialogue in our heads, like when you feel, that you're like what we could people consider they're conscious, right? And they're talking to themselves. I mean, usually that's what's happening. Your jinn is talking, and your soul is trying to reason. And then eventually you come up with an action. Either way. But the thing is, if you convince, what is it like? I need some sleep, but like if you convince your jinn, yeah,
I
then
understand.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like by the end of our lives, like one of them is like we're either gonna convince our jinn or our jinn's gonna convince us. But I think
Mm-hmm.
he or she makes it too, because I think the verse in the Quran, and I might have heard the messenger when he was talking about it, what it sounded like so like how the disbeliever, like their companion will, I think in Surah 43, they'll like want to disown each other and blame each other. And for the believer though, Rashad said, your jinn will be thanking you, because he's the one that sided really hard with Satan. So you make it, he'll really be happy on the day of judgment. Be thanking you. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
like, so it's either one of the. Now, if you die before the age of 40, I heard him say like that like just because the human goes to heaven is not the case for the jinn. And he said that's a part of the rest. What's that word with the R? The restitution or something, as for the jinn siding so hard with Satan, like more.
Mm-hmm.
When because he was asked about the age of 40, but
Mm-hmm.
those don't all like those people's genes. They're not going automatically to heaven. Like they could go on and like be back. But the humans will make it. And he said that's more of like a requital for the And it kind of made sense to me too, because it's like, okay, like I guess like, okay, even number of jinns and humans go into heaven. Before that, I was thinking, and I was like, okay, well, they did sign or say, but who am I to say, God's most gracious? But when I heard that, he said, the age of 40, for the human being is God's very so merciful, So someone had asked the question, and I was like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, so Brother Justin, like, there's also the introduction of the Quran where this is discussed, under Satan, where it says, Father of all the jinns. It says, putting the jinns and the humans to the test, stipulated that Satan shall reproduce whenever a human being is born. As mentioned above, every time a human being is born, a jinn being is born to serve as a constant companion of the human person. Every human being is subjected to the incessant persuasions of Satan's representative, who lives in the same body from birth to death. Satan's representative tries to convince the human companion of Satan's point of view that God alone is not enough. On the day of judgment, the jinn companion serves as a witness against the human counterpart. Many jinn companions are converted to God's point of view by the human companions. So many jinn companions are converted to God's point of view by the human companions. And then it says, God did not leave the human being without preparation to help the humans in their final chance to reconsider their blasphemy. Every person is born with instinctive knowledge about God and no one else. Knowledge that God alone and no one else is our Lord and Master. The jinns were not given this instinctive knowledge, but they are given a much longer lifespan and greater abilities to study God's science throughout the innermost universe. Since they represent Satan's point of view, their instinctive nature leans strongly in favor of polytheism. In addition to our built-in instinct to worship God alone, God sends messengers to help us redeem ourselves. With all these elements in view, we can appreciate the fact that only unforgivable offense, if maintained until death, is idol worship, believing that anyone else besides God possesses any power. And then talks about the 40-year grace period. Are there any other comments or questions? Anyone has any off-topic things?
Night of Destiny coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's that about?
What's that about? So that is about. I actually had prepared a sermon about the Night of Destiny. So I will, but it didn't get recorded as I had planned. So God willing, I'll put out a presentation soon also. But it talks more about the mathematical part of it, right? But the Night of Destiny, we know, is the 27th night. It's gonna be, for most of us, it is all of us actually. It's going to fall on the 5th of April or 4th of April?
It should be April.
On Friday. Friday, yeah. It's coming up on Friday, basically, next Friday. So next Friday night, basically, And God says in the Quran, it's better than 1,000 months. And watch out for the presentation, because it also talks about the 1,000 months in there and the mathematical proofs regarding that, God willing.
So I understand.
It's pretty interesting.
I understand that. I understand where it says that in the Quran, but what does that mean?
What do you mean?
Well, it says it's better than 1,000 months. Fair, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
What that means is that it's better than 1,000 months. Like if you meditate in that night, it's like you meditated more than 1,000 months, right? So when that night is meditating that night is multiplied your whatever you do. Your credits are multiplied like by over 1,000 times more. So it's like if you meditate 1 second, it's like you meditate more than 1,000 seconds, right? So.
Oh, okay.
So this night is there for you to really help you, exponentially grow your soul. Take advantage of God's grace.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And so we have, some previous audio from the Messenger of the Covenant, as a sample of how they commemorated God during that night, and he. I am not sure if you have seen it or we have talked much about it in the studies, but inshallah, we can also post that PDF for anyone that he talks about the Night of Destiny and how it's important and what are some of the things, for example, we can do to commemorate God on that night, and etc. etc.
Hey, God willing. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's a good subject to talk about. It's coming up, and it's a real blessing for us, just to know for a fact when the night is going to be, and especially with all the mathematical evidence to support it. I mean, I was just thinking about now as we were talking about the Quran's mathematical miracle, and as you were talking about the Quran's mathematical miracle, like because there's many signs that are found just in that one surah 97, titled the Night of Destiny, and I was just thinking, so like, if you just had that one surah with all of those mathematical facts, because most of them are also revolving around the number 27, and their multiples of 19. So having something like that, I mean, it's just mind-boggling to think like how that would even work. For God to design it in such a way that all those numbers add up, or to be multiples in this manner, from many different aspects of it, right? It's truly awesome.
Yeah, thank God. Should be happy for any grace that's given to us, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, mashallah, usually what we do also is, we also have a live stream on the Night of Destiny. So if anyone wants to join in and, commemorate God, they can just join in on the video too. I mean, on the stream, audio stream. We're playing commemoration, including that audio that I just mentioned.
Yeah, mashallah. I like that.
Sure. Yeah, fifth. So God willing, that will be on the 5th of April at sunset.
God willing.
Yeah, and that also adds up to be a multiple of 19, the 5th of April.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, 5 plus 4 plus 2024 equals 2033, which is 19 times 107. Yeah, so. So, I guess if there are no other comments or questions, God willing, we can conclude the study. What do you guys think?
Yeah, inshallah.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, well, thank you, Brother Justin, for leading the study, and thank you, everyone, for participating in our Quran study. God willing, our next English Quran study would be on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time. God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum.